coming out of our last meeting, the consensus from council was we don't want to fully discontinue incentivizing student housing projects. There does appear to be some concern about oversaturation though. And so if we are to move forward with future consideration on these projects, how do we raise the bar and include more public benefit in those specific type of projects? And so really the goal for my conversation with y'all today is to hopefully come to a little more clarity and get specific feedback on. I guess first of all, we want to have a clear definition of how we're defining student housing projects as they're coming in. That should be relatively easy to do. What are the additional criteria or benchmarks that we want to include on these? And I guess some consideration of what level. So if affordable housing is is maybe say a mandatory requirement for these future projects, is there a percentage that we want to go with? Are there conditional requirements that we'd like to place on these developers? I know affordable housing and public parking tend to seem to get most of the interest from council, but there are other things that you could consider based on geography, based on additional safety and pedestrian improvements. So what do we have to have at the end of the day, and what are the optional things that we want to consider? And then once we've got that, I think we'll have enough information to really put forward a specific recommendation for council to adopt, which could be done just by amending the resolution if council's inclined to proceed forward with those. And then wanted to get a little bit of feedback as far as some discussions that have been going on regarding fee sharing of some of these projects, specifically when it comes to the cost to serve with regards to police and fire. Right now, we don't have a clearly defined definition for student housing. I mean, it's pretty general at this point. And the way it is in the commercial development incentive, we haven't parsed that out and made it separate from multifamily commercial development. I think some of the common things that we see from our side that make student housing different from a multifamily project would be student housing projects leased by the bed versus multifamily housing, which leases by the unit. Student housing projects in some cases will exceed 3 bedrooms per unit. So you can have a student housing development that has 1 unit and can have 4 to 6 bedrooms attached to that rental unit. And then something that's a little more general and vague, but we did take note of is their lease periods tend to swing around the timing of when college enrollment begins. So they do a lot of leasing for their units in the summertime. And then again, they many of them are very upfront about how they market themselves to the public. Student housing, self-defines itself as such, and they typically try to sell themselves that way too. So if we were to look at these, I guess, what would y'all feel comfortable in kind of using as defining periods for student housing? Would it be the lease by the bed and the number of bedrooms per unit? Are those some good criteria for us to kind of, separate these off from the herd, or are there other things y'all would be thinking of?
My big thing is the lease by the bed. To me, I think that clearly distinguishes student housing or the types of projects that are intended for students versus something that would be available to students just by mere proximity to the university versus, anybody could have them. Like if I am, a mom with 3 kids, I'm not going to go to a place that leases by the bed. So I think that's clear. And I guess the other thing for me is if we're looking at the multifamily, just the density of it. And so to me, I think that's something that we look at as well.
Well, I agree. I think the bed, the number of beds seem to be the most common description for student housing. And I agree, sometimes proximity helps and sometimes, and it doesn't. I know my son lived in one of those type units up in Greenville around Clemson, and they had the quads. So, you know, it's some interesting living arrangements, but that seems to be the most common descriptor. Do you agree, Will?
Yeah, I agree with you, Councilman Davis and Councilwoman Devine. I do think you know, us giving exemptions in the past to rent by the bed for over the 4-bedroom units is something that can be looked at moving forward. You know, it's tough. Our code enforcement, our rental enforcement calls for, you know, only, well, I believe it's 3 unrelated individuals living together. That's the max. But then again, you know, as a property owner, you can build a 4-bedroom apartment, obviously. But that's, you know, that's where the enforcement of this comes in, which I think is another layer that we need to look at strengthening, given our code enforcement and our zoning folks some more I guess resources to keep up with all this. But yeah, no, I completely agree. Rent by the bed is the obvious one that we can look at.
Is that the one y'all want to kind of use as the defining criteria then? Just that one, or did y'all want to look at the unit, the number of beds per unit as well?
I think that's the only one we really can hang our hat on, you know.
Unless you are familiar with some other models, Ryan.
I'm not, you know,
Okay.
and it's pretty vague. You know, they're kind of run and managed differently. You know, but from a technical standpoint, there's no huge difference otherwise versus some of these. You know, the floor layouts may be different. Like I said, the bedrooms per unit may be different. I mean, at least by the bed's kind of the easiest way to go about that. And I think we're very good with using that as the criteria.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So then the next part we would want to discuss a little bit is kind of these criteria options for consideration. So if we're going to raise the bar for student housing projects, you know, going forward, saying you must have or you must include these elements in your project, or we would like for you to include these elements in your project. I think that's where we wanted to get a little more specific as well, is what is the bar? You know, what do we need to be communicating to people as they come in and say, well, if you want to get this consideration for council, you have to have these things. And so I've listed a number of these here on the page here. You know, I think we've got some ability to have, you know, mandatory requirements. So I think we can have things that we must have at the end of the day versus some things that we would like to see as being conditional. But this is kind of what we've started with. I know points 1 and 2 at the top are ones that we typically seem to hear a little bit more about. So their placement at the top of the list is intentional. But, you know, that inclusion of affordable or workforce housing units, and what does that percentage like? A public parking space. We kind of ask people at this point to include public parking. It's nice to have, but do we want to put a strict limit on that? And then, you know, just a variety of other things. I think, you know, even with the project Talba that came through recently, we did see a lot of layering of some of these other items that, you know, council may not determine that we have to have at the end of the day, but could be some nice value adds, whether it's additional pedestrian safety, the inclusion of other elements in the project that would be beneficial to the public, like retail, office, restaurant space, energy efficiency improvements, other safety improvements. Some of these may be looking at brownfield sites where there's remediation requirement, and that's always a nice to have. And then if they want to make other contributions, in, around, or in the vicinity of their projects with regards to public parks, greenfield space, and even supporting, some of the neighbor and business associations. So just wanted to give you all a few minutes to kind of look at this and let us know, what's resonating with you as far as what would you like to see if we raise that bar?
Brian, I think that's a great list. As you mentioned, number one really stands out to me, the workforce and affordable component. You look at national case studies in municipalities our size and larger, trend towards, upwards 25-30% of the total units dedicated to the workforce and affordable. So I would strongly support that being one of the major drivers for any developer looking to qualify for the tax break from the city and county. And then as everything else flows through, it would be a kind of tell us what other benefits you can bring to the project, especially how you interact with the neighborhood.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sam, how do you think we can work proper property management into something like this? Because, property management is something we have a huge problem with in all districts.
I think it appears that the best model that gives that causes a good relationship between the surrounding property owners and let's say a neighborhood is on-site management as opposed to someone being away on call. I've just dealt with something on yesterday, but I think that's one thing we could. I don't know if you want to require it or demand it, but I think that should be a healthy conversation, because you want that development to be a good neighbor. And I think that the way that happens is that there's good communications. You've got somebody that's on site that can make sure that the rules are followed. That is when most of the anxieties kick in, where people feel that the initial agreements aren't being adhered to, or there's unfortunately sometimes there's conflict on the property that kind of spills out into the community, and you don't want that. I think the one thing we want to consider, or maybe imagine, as we learn about a development, is impact, local impact. The numbers are one thing, but if you combine that, the beds with, let's say, you do have the commercial components attached to it, how much of an impact is that on the existing area? We're looking at parking, I think traffic impacts and so forth, but I would think we ought to consider that so that an existing community neighborhood doesn't experience what they might consider culture shock. For us, increased traffic generally means some investments in terms of safety factors with traffic and that sort of thing. But I would say with that and local management on the site are the things that kind of keeps everybody happy, puts everybody in a positive comfort zone, you know.
Mr. Davis and Mr. Brennan, if I could add, I think the points you're raising are really, important. I think whether it's student housing, market rate, and even the recent presentation by Columbia Housing with a lot of their wonderful projects underway, the time to capture these developers and potentially their adherence to certain type of property management is at the onset of the project.
On the front end, yeah.
When you have a captive audience by them with you for project consideration. And I think some of the things that, we've been noticing, whether amplified during COVID, but the relationships between Chief Holbrook and Chief Jenkins with the developments and those who are actually on site has become even more critical. Times where we were seeing at some of the student housing projects, for example, certain behaviors and, just sheer numbers of young people and things that they were involved in, and what our law enforcement and fire marshals had to get involved with is just unacceptable. And so I think if we have that type of acknowledgement on the front end by property management of what they're going to be held accountable to, I think it's really important. I mean, even with some of the projects coming online, any of them from the Columbia Housing to market rate, affordable or attainable, I think this notion of a public safety presence has become more needed. And what can some of the private developers bring to the table on the front end to assist with our law enforcement infrastructure in neighboring communities, and or just, again, a partnership of some type. I'm not saying that it, necessarily has to be law enforcement on site all the time, but there definitely needs to be a stronger relationship on the front end and an expectation that that's maintained for the duration.
I think those are great points, and certainly something we need to weave into not only the overall discussions, but the expectation that if you're receiving this benefit, we expect to see a certain level, of community safety provided at the end of the day, and may need to just figure out, where exactly we weave that in, whether it's through the resolution or through the actual ordinance, or whether it can be done through a memorandum of agreement with the specific developers as they're getting it as well. May just have some technical questions there, because I guess at the end of the day, if we want to be able to have some accountability and some ability, to claw back on these, how do we measure, tangibly how public safety needs are being met, I guess. And maybe that's number of calls per year have to remain below a certain level, or the cost per serve has to be at or below a certain level. I just personally have some questions there, but nothing that we can't talk our way through.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, completely agree.
Okay, so requirement-wise, I think from a mandatory perspective, we would want to make the affordable, the workforce housing element an inclusion, as in you must have, for consideration. Is that how y'all would like to proceed on that?
But
I
go
would
ahead,
say
Tamika.
from my standpoint, it probably kind of depends on. I definitely think it needs to be included and have a conversation. The way that may look different depending on the structure and the development. So, for instance, Project Catawba, the discussions have been there'll be 1 bedrooms and they're under the definition and meet the income requirements, but because of where it is and everything else, it would probably be more attractive for young professionals. That certainly is not something that, you know, a family would need. If it's a development that ends up not lending itself to the criteria, I know other cities have done where there might be, you know, a percentage of the workforce housing and or a deposit to some kind of fund at the city that continues our effort. So anyway, that's just kind of my thought process, because I'm just kind of wondering, would that always be an attractive unit for somebody who needs the type of housing that we're talking about? So if it's a young professional and it's a development that is going to be a whole lot of students, not because of student housing, but because of where it's located and everything else, you know, that would be probably more attractive to, you know, someone that's 23 in their first job and meets the requirements, but it might not be necessarily attractive to, you know, the 35-year-old who has, you know, more of a lower wage job. So I guess I'm just trying to think through if it's mandatory or if it is strongly encouraged, and then through what Ryan's talking about, whatever agreement, whether it's the resolution, MOA, or whatever that is, that whatever is discussed and determined, then it makes the details of that particular arrangement makes it into that agreement. But if we put it into our criteria, then the developer coming in understands that's a priority, and whether it is affordable housing units set aside or there is a investment in the city's affordable housing programs, it could be either or.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like that. Rather than appearing to dictate to a developer, that's an option.
So I'm not sure I'm following that, Councilwoman.
Mika's point.
Are you saying that a student housing development could come in and essentially buy out of that percentage of set aside workforce affordable housing by investing somewhere else?
No, and Will, what I'm doing is I'm thinking through it. What I'm kind of just wondering, really not so much for the developer, but for the people that it's set aside to, like, because as I've been talking through Project Catawba, it's going to work better because it will be on the bus line, but it also, because of where it's located and the, I guess you'd say, lack of amenities in that area, it'll probably be more attractive to young professionals that need housing. You know, someone that's 23 that's coming out of college making, you know, $27,000 would meet the criteria. So that's set aside. But I guess I'm wondering, like, for instance, if it is a unit somewhere, I guess I'm just kind of wondering if it's not a unit that would be attractive to the young professional or someone who needs affordable housing, do we not let them out of it, but have some additional requirement that, well, if this is not a development that would be best suited for affordable housing, you're not out of it, we still require something to be paid into the city's affordable housing program. So I'm just thinking through it. I guess I'm just trying to figure out if it's always going to be a development that's attractive for affordable housing units. That's, I guess, my question. Like, going back to what we were talking about before, I mean, certainly if we're not going to do any that are leased by the bed, then that's perfectly. But seriously, if it's something like that, do you really think that a young professional or, you know, a young single person who needs affordable housing wants to live in that unit? I guess that's what I'm saying.
Right.
Like, well, I'm not going to call out units, but there's certain units right now. I know me, I would not want to go live there, but I don't want to get someone, I don't want the developer to get the out of, you know, we're not having, no one is applying or.
Yeah, and that's what I'm afraid of. I don't want them, because I've seen it in other cities where they just buy out of it essentially, and go back to the 100%, well above market rate rentals. I think that.
How are you seeing that in other cities that do that? I mean, is it more so that someone is not interested in those units? Because that's where I'm thinking through it, and I feel like we have to do more research on it as well.
Yeah, we definitely do. And I'll send you those case studies. I believe the municipalities I've seen allow for the developer to either buy in or buy out. And I think some of them have a stair step tax incentive rebate as well. For if you don't go the full 30%, if you only want to go 10%, then you only get this incentive.
Do you know if those are cities that or states that have inclusionary zoning? Are they buying out of inclusionary zoning, or are they buying out?
That's a great question. I believe there was a zoning layer that was part of it. Whether it's a rezoning to get to that incentive, I'll float that around to staff.
So what I would say, and I can certainly take this to the Affordable Housing Committee as well as do some other research. I guess to the original question for Ryan, I would like to do some more research. I think affordable workforce, attainable, whatever we're going to call it, is definitely should be a priority. The question is, how is it mandated, whether it is a percentage of units or anything else? But I think it needs to be priority. I don't want to put something in place and say it's mandatory and it ends up not getting the result that we want.
And a percentage of average median income might help with that, whether it's 50% of AMI. It could, that's the $20,000 income level, up to 36,000. I would encourage you, Ryan, to look at the AMI approach.
That was going to be my question. So we then could, in our own way, maybe fashion that as a model, one or two different models that would give us what we want, helps us meet our workforce affordable housing goals, helps us with the traditional and working with the developer for traditional housing, student housing as they know it, and then maybe I think maybe a mix. You don't see it that often, but you just have a development with on the front end, no spoken income requirements in terms of upper versus mid versus low. But it would be good if you do have a developer that comes in and says, it's open, we work with anybody, and if they can pay the rent, or these are the price ranges that come with this particular model. You know what I mean?
And I think, the more clarity we can provide these folks up, and say, well, listen, affordable workforce housing is a priority to us, and we're really looking for these in the projects. And if that doesn't fit for you from the development side, then maybe, we're not the best community for this. The developer is coming to us, looking for these incentives. We're now looking for additional public benefit here. And I guess what we're just really trying to do is kind of lay down the rails and the guide work so that, we don't wind up having unnecessary conversations when there's not going to be, a mutual interest to help each other out at the end of the day.
Right.
I think the more clear we can be on what we're asking for up front to these folks, then the quicker we can get down, to brass tacks with people who want to help us out with some of these additional amenities. So
we just have to clearly define our goals.
And if affordable workforce housing is a part of that, whether that takes the shape of a percentage or, some type of contribution, that's good. We've got 8 or 9 items here. If we want to say, hey, you have to meet this from a housing standpoint, and then we'd like to see you check 2 or 3 of these other boxes we've got listed out here, so we can really get the mileage out of it.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to ask for that too. That's kind of what I'd been thinking in my head is, here's what we have to have at the end of the day. So you have to check this box. And if we give you 5 or 6 other options and you can do a couple other things on that list that help us out as a community, kind of these conditional objectives, then we're good with having a fruitful conversation and considering your project. So,
Tamika, we just had a meeting about this, NLC, the University Cities subcommittee. I'll contact that staff and get Ryan and his team with some of the folks that participated to get feedback on structuring, some suggestions on good structuring for that.
Okay.
That'd be great.
okay. So we'll work on crafting some language and building out the model from here based on the feedback y'all have just given us. And then I guess one of the final points I wanted to talk about was there's been some conversations around, the sharing and the cost to serve of these as these projects are coming in, additional city time and staff and resources are required, to help serve these developments. And so the conversations come up about, whether there could be a request for additional financial resources to go to the city to help support additional police and fire costs. And again, another area I think we wanted to get y'all's feedback on as well, that breakout of who gets what is really set at the county council level. And so for us to make, that request for consideration, I think that, that's something that we're going to need to reach out to Richland County, talk to Jeff Rubel about, have to run by his folks and see, right now it's done on a pro rata basis. So,
can you give the sample project, Ryan, to describe, take Project Catawba, and you don't have to use the actual numbers, but describe the structure of breakdown between, services starting at the top from the collector at the county and how the service and finances break down from there.
Yeah, so let's say everything kind of comes in at the 100% mark, so you're at full freight tax value. The multi-county industrial park structures it out, and so a small percent, about 1% of that goes out to Fairfield County as part of their agreement. The county economic development gets a portion of that breakout that goes back into their capital fund, which helps, with industrial park and infrastructure and acquisition. And so once you roll those things out, you're probably at about 92%. And then you layer the tax break in on top of that. And so then you're back down to 50%. And then once you're at that 50%, then everything is assigned out as it normally would be on the regular tax structure. So the city would get 17% of that. The county gets its 20-ish%.
And then school board, zoo, the other line items that you see,
it's all
high on your property
just as it would be under a normal circumstance. Yes, sir.
All right.
Now the case has been made for student housing projects. The school districts tend to get the lion's share. I remember a couple of years ago there was some discussion, particularly with regards to these because they are for the student population, as to whether there would be some willingness to kind of reconsider the portion of the school district breakout because these are college age kids. They're not families. They don't have the need of the school district services as much. That was something that came up, but to my recollection, I don't think that
They don't make that.
very far at the end of the day.
Yeah, don't make that distinction.
But it was
Good.
very, very much in respect strictly to the student housing projects, you know.
What are the
obviously,
steps for that
multifamily
decision-making
projects would
process?
need school district services and whatnot, so.
So you'd have to get sign off if you were to pursue something like that from obviously county, school district, everybody that gets a slice of the millage.
No, it would need to go through county council. You know, once these are done, it's not a tax anymore. It's transferred into a fee. And so really, you know, county council can make that determination at the end of the day about how that fee gets, you know, ultimately distributed. I think we're really the only other consenting authority that has to be a party to that, because it would be in our municipal jurisdiction as well. But it could be done relatively unilaterally, if that's what you're asking.
Okay.
Ryan, let me ask this. Do we know, I know that the mayor mentioned when we first started having this conversation about making sure the county was aware that we were having this discussion, et cetera, et cetera. I've talked to a couple county council members, and I'm not sure that honestly this is huge on their radar, but do we know, or is there, I mean, I guess at some point, if we decide to address the taxes, we will certainly send them an official letter, but do you know, have there been any official conversations from a staff level for them to know that this is where we're considering things, and to see if there's any initial thought process on their portion, on their part, about dealing with the percentages?
Not since we've begun these most recent discussions, and you know, I'm certainly kind of willing to have that conversation with Jeff at the county and talk through it a little bit more. I think we just wanted to make sure before we began those discussions that we had a better handle on what council was looking for. Yeah. I know Councilman Rickenman has also expressed some interest in this, as other council people have as well. So I'm fine with having the conversation. I just want to make sure we've got our ducks in a row before we begin that. And I don't know if there's been any other higher level conversations, but from a staff to staff perspective, we haven't really broached the subject yet.
Well, I think, and Councilman Davis and I talked about this yesterday. You know, police and fire is very important to get our share, and if that share grows because of these types of large developments, which they would be to qualify, you know, construction price and everything, and then I think it's important for us to communicate with county council on that for specifically those public safety initiatives. So I think that's a priority.
Yeah, I think as soon as the sooner we, you know, really put some meat on this bone that we're playing with, that gives anybody, Tamika or you, Ryan, and so forth, it gives you more, I guess, more substance to add to your conversations with county council people. And see how they react to it. I think at the end of the day, everybody's going to benefit. I think that's the selling point. But you just need to make sure that what we put before them definitely meets our needs.
Yeah, and I mean, we want to be really sensitive to it. I know when you start talking about redistributing people's revenue streams, it get to be a touchy subject pretty quick. I think that's why there's been a little more willingness to kind of look at this, a model like this for student housing, you know, because there's less of that need maybe at the school district level. I don't know that you can have the same conversation around mixed use or multifamily in general. But I think there is enough of a case for us to have at least a fruitful conversation around these particular types of projects.
Okay.
what are next steps, I guess is the question.
I would say now we can start to work on some language for an amendment for the current resolution. So based on your feedback with the, how we want to classify student housing, probably need to do a little more homework on the workforce affordable housing component of that. But I've got some ideas there and some ideas on language for conditional requirements, if we're wanting to see them achieve certain other benefits. I think we could get something drafted and back for review in the next few weeks. And then, as Councilman Brennan said, it would probably be good for us to touch base with some of his folks at the university contacts. They might could help us frame some of that language as well. But I think I've got enough to at least get a draft started from, and if there's other things, outside of that list that we had earlier that y'all would like to see as conditional or optional things we may want developers to consider, please feel free to share that with us, and we can get those included as well.
Okay.
And then I guess, a little more feedback on how we want to proceed with the cost to serve conversation as well.
Okay. Ryan, this layout of suggestions and options this morning, I see this as very valuable. I mean, it's good information for me today. So can you, I'm not as technically savvy as you. I can't download this right now, so will you send us a copy?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I will forward it out to y'all.
Yeah, your talking points this morning are good.
Yes, sir. I'll have it in your inbox in the next few minutes.
All right. Anything else we need to add to this conversation this morning? I think
Councilman Davis, you run a good meeting, man.
Get out of here, man. I still want to be like you when I grow up. No, this is good this morning. It adds to the roadmap that we're trying to, put together. Tamika, you're good? Next meeting?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we'll work on getting some language put together and get back to y'all soon with something to mull over as far as an amendment would go.
Great.
Okay. Thank you and staff, everybody.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Kay.
Ma'am.
Good info.
Thank
Thank y'all.